Well, I'm happy to talk about a project that we are still fine-tuning and improving. It's a collaboration of several people. Two people also in this room beyond me who can also, for example, contribute whenever they want. So again, it's challenging to explore things, for example, when there's like competitive pressure or major changes in academia, because it's quite endogenous. For example, pressure can evolve over time, so it's a little bit hard to explore empirically. So you're interested in having historical events that act as a shock, and you have many economists who have explored this kind of German unification as a natural experiment. So you see research we talked about today, well-being literature, Paul with his co-authors on a beautiful paper, also looking at well-being. But nobody has actually done that in the area of academia, analyzing the consequences of this. And again, here we are actually interested to have a closer look at East German scholars, because they're facing a lot of changes, structural changes, and therefore we want to see how they adapt, how they act, and how they cooperate and so forth. And we're going to focus mainly on natural science, engineering, due to also their importance, for example, about innovation and so forth. And again, you can start looking at things like productivity effects. You can look at, for example, so do they switch the topic? Do they actually, how mobile are they, cognitively mobile? And we're going to show a couple of results. And again, we're thinking about more possibilities, but again, the paper gets longer and longer. So maybe you can give me some insights what you find interesting. Again, you have this kind of large-scale institutional restructuring in the East. So, like for example, downsizing academia, introducing new vacancies, and we're going to look at those moving around. Today, you have 16 universities in the former East German part. In total, you have 17 universities, and again, this kind of radical change offers us ideas to understand, okay, are there new opportunities for collaboration, because it's opening up, but also what sort of constraints do you experience, or how easy is it for you to be adaptable, and issues, for example, okay, what's the implication if you feel like there's job insecurity due to these kind of radical changes. So what sort of data are we looking at? And you can say maybe this is a little bit biased, but again, we're focusing on STEM. We're looking at classifying people based on their activity as researchers, late 70s, till actually here close to the change. And then we actually can classify them into East and West Germans, and we rely on the Web of Science. You may criticize, well, is that a good proxy sometimes if you look at East German scholars? But I think it is interesting enough for us to do that, okay? Now then we can explore the development over time and all this interaction that I discussed before, and we can also start running, for example, regression analysis with interaction effects for dummies post-reunification dummies. What we do when we run a regression analysis, we get rid of the first couple of years due to the law of movement and adjustment. So how does the data set look like? So we have quite a massive amount of peer-reviewed publications, and we have a nice set of West German and East German scientists. So here you see the movement that's happening. That makes it interesting to use as a classification. So you see quite a substantial amount, if you look at the share, of actually scholars who moved from the West to the East. Okay, so we can actually compare those to those who stayed, for example, in the East and West in general. Okay, so you can do this kind of classification. So you can see here, we can look at East German scholars, we can look at West German scholars, and we can look at those who moved from West to East throughout this couple of years of transition period. And then we can look at a couple of things like publications, we can look at citation, normalized by publication, and also impact factor, normalized. So what do we observe if you look at here at this kind of development over time? We observe that Western perform better than Eastern ones. We observe that those who move from West to East, they actually they're catching up and they perform even better afterwards. And there's some similarities in the citation track record, and we also see that East German scholars are catching up in relation to citations. And there's also some catching up happening when you look at the impact factor. Okay, but there's a gap between also those who actually are in the East versus those who move from the West to the East, who act very similar to those who stay actually in the West. Now we can also look at things, for example, how is the closeness? Okay, how is the closeness between between research that was done, again, before the change in the East and the West. And you see some overlaps. So you see overlaps, for example, general chemistry, biochemistry, and molecular biology. But you also see a lot of differences. So we can start looking at and get a proxy, for example, what happens with overlap. Okay, looking at quartiles, and see, for example, are those who actually are closer to the profile of a West German scientist, is it easier for those to be adaptable? Okay, because they are already active in a Western-style research environment. They may have access to better resources, and therefore also maybe more competitive also throughout this entire restructuring. So what we do is we then classify people, as you see here again, West Germans, but then also you look at those, looking at quartiles, top and bottom quartiles, those who have the most West overlap and those who have the least West overlap. And again, you can here again look at what's the development. And you see a lot of similarities between actually those East German with the most West overlap in terms of publications. And you see a lot of catching up happening there in terms of citations. And in particular, also difference between the least West overlap if you look here in terms of impact factor. Okay, to get a quality measurement, how you actually publish. You can then start doing this kind of interaction effects. It looks a total mess. I don't know why I did that. But anyway, let's look at some. We have different proxies of overlap. I'm not going to talk about this. The traditional ones used also in other studies in general, from correlation coefficients to again a little bit more complex, but not that difficult. But I'm not going to talk about it. But let's take a look at these interaction effects. So post 1990 with East. So what that indicates here is positive. The statistical significance indicates that they in the East are able to catch up. And if you look, for example, at the interaction effect between those who have a higher overlap with the West Germans, you see they are actually able to perform well in terms of impact factor. Okay? And this is quite robust throughout all these kind of proxies that we are using. And here, this kind of negative one indicates that those who are actually working on this kind of high-profile topics in the West are actually losing. And that's a difficult question. What's the reason of that? One can speculate. Maybe there is a saturation effect in the West. Maybe there are resource allocations. Maybe there is also, for example, that people are pushing into other fields afterwards. You can start also building a network. How does the pre-Germanification network looks like? So you see here, obviously, very East European dominant in this network. And then you can look at what happens afterwards. So it becomes larger, the network, it's more denser, and you see this kind of East-West divide actually disappearing. So then we can actually look at, okay, how is the cooperation of somebody from the East with somebody from the West based on, for example, a stronger overlap. So for those actually with a stronger overlap, they're more likely actually to interact with West Germans. They are more likely to interact with those who come from the West to the East. They are less likely to interact with those who leave from the East to the West. But you see not more interaction with West or the US, and less interaction with scholars from Soviet Union. What you can then actually look at, you can actually pull them together. And then you can actually explore what happens, for example, with what those who actually overlap. Okay, so you have East-West comparison, overlap, and post. And you see for here a decrease in activity. In terms of former Soviet Union scientists, for those who are stronger connected to this kind of West German research. And you see here, for example, a stronger interaction for those in the East, actually with those compared to the West. 2 minutes. With the Americans and even with the former Soviet Union scientists. And then you can start to look at proximity. So what happens if you are very close, and then look at collaboration. If you have a close research proximity, and how do you collaborate? Well, actually, it's a very high research proximity for those, for example, collaborate between East and East, so East in East collaborations. And then obviously then it's a higher one among those who are who are strongly connected with the topics, with the research of West Germany, which is not surprising, and a lower one who actually have less kind of overlap with those from the West German part. Now then you can also look at, for example, the share of new fields. And what you observe there is that those who are actually on this top quartile with the West German research are actually less likely to move into new fields. So actually by not being this kind of, have this connectivity with West German overlaps, you actually are forced to actually collaborate, be more open for new topics. Okay, the lower one you see here, so if you have been collaborating with somebody from a Soviet scientist, at least one publication, then you observe, for example, you are less likely than actually to change to a new field. So that's it from what we are. You can actually play around more. You can look at age. Age could be a factor of flexibility. You can look at specific institutes, like the Max Planck Institute, where you have West and East German institutes, which is very high-profile institutes. You can do a lot of additional stuff around the data. Did I meet the 10 minutes?
Yeah, you're